Leading like a tyrant can cause professional destruction. But can a leader be effective without any dark side at all? And if you have a dark side, how do you wrestle with it so that you, your team, and your future don't end up in professional Hades? Keep watching and you'll get the answer to all of that and a lot more. We're back here at the Myth Slayer Cafe, and with me is George Rivera. George, we got to know a little bit about you. Tell us who you are.
Scott, George Rivera here, 20 plus years, an educator, facilitator, trainer, and most importantly, a dad. Being a dad is the cornerstone of my life, being a family man.
And that says more than anything. You know, so many folks come in here and they put out beautiful summaries of their CVs or their resume, and I encourage folks to do that. But I always have a special place in my heart for those that define themselves by the relationship with their family, and that's exactly what you just did. On the subject of family, today we're going to focus on one of the family members of the 12 Olympians that ruled the ancient Greek mythical world, Hermes, the messenger of the gods. And as we go through this conversation, folks who are watching this are going to learn a lot more about you, George. They'll understand, I suspect, why Hermes speaks to you, although you're going to get a chance to explain that in detail in a moment. But for those who don't know who Hermes was the son of the chief god Zeus and a woman named Maya. And Hermes was the god of commerce. In order to sell, you need to be able to speak. So he also was the god of orators. And with tremendous oratorical skill, he naturally became the herald of the gods and their chief messenger. That takes us to you, George. What about Hermes speaks to you in a way that might speak to the folks watching this?
I have to say, the term messenger alone for me is the story of my life, literally and figuratively. 16 years old, World Trade Center, Georgie Porgy running through the towers of the World Trade, going from floor to floor, meeting people, understanding things, seeing things, hearing things that I never thought I would hear as a 16-year-old. Off the books, secret tunnels and stairways and all sorts of fun. My job, the messenger, to bring things throughout the towers, including these huge discs of information at the time. This was late 80s, early 90s, and even letters as a carrier. So this taught me a lot of lessons. So this immediately, when I think about Hermes, I think about the messenger and what that meant to me in those days and how that translated the through line of my life to this day.
That is fascinating because many people, I think, very foolishly view the role of messenger as either a passive or a subordinate one, when actually I think the ancient Greeks got it right. The role of messenger or herald is one of extreme importance and potentially extreme power. Now, there was another messenger of the gods who kind of filled in for Hermes. Her name was Iris. And Iris comes up a lot in the Iliad. When she appears in the middle of battle or to communicate with any of the mortals, you get a sense as to the full power of what a messenger can be. I mean, she's a formidable presence. Hermes, as one of the 12 Olympians, several steps in the hierarchy above Iris, it was no comparison. But you're coming at this from a very interesting angle. You're talking about it in terms of not just the skills that it helps you bring into whatever task it is that you're doing in the moment, but as a way to, or as an opportunity in your own life for lessons to be learned as to your future in other endeavors that you engaged in. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Great point, Scott. I was really moved by what you just said because it immediately got me thinking about others and my service to others,
Mm.
being a really good listener. And because I became such a good listener at such a young age, I had adults who were 3 decades older than me asking me, coming to me for safe space, a space where they
Mm.
could just be themselves, where they could see themselves in this mirror of this safe space. And if I was asked, which I learned very early in my life, I would share out what I thought I was hearing. So this was a powerful tool that helped me literally survive the streets of the South Bronx when I would come home from this part-time job as a messenger.
Fascinating. There's a lot that's going through my head even as you're talking about that. First of all, let's talk about positions that are associated with power in our society. I'm just going to say finance professionals or lawyers. I'm an attorney, and a lot of the audience for this show is made up of attorneys. What are attorneys, for instance, but messengers of the client's case, messengers of the client's guilt or innocence, messengers of the integrity of their message or whatever it is that they want to do. If a contract or other transactional action is occurring during the course of the legal relationship, what is a financial professional but an interpreter of what they are reading and a messenger of the statements that the client might have that the financial professional is telling the client about. In each of those situations and many more that I'm surely just not able to think of off the top of my head, creating a safe space is of paramount importance. I mean, imagine if you're an attorney and you're not creating a safe space for your client to be able to tell you the truth. How are you going to effectively defend them? How have you found the creation of a safe space, George, to be helpful in other endeavors outside of just what we hear a lot of that people complain about? Oh, I need a safe space to express whatever my quote unquote tender little feelings are. Do you find the creation of a safe space to have more universal leadership value?
Scott, absolutely. That is, you nailed it because, well, not that much further in my life as the messenger in these towers, I immediately jumped into the field of education as a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And besides the environmental safe space of a student walking into my classroom or a teacher walking into my classroom, this was an opportunity for the vessel, myself, to find ways and curate ways to neutralize my own shadows, right?
Mm.
So this taught me very early on, I got a shadow. It's right there. I'm not afraid to look at it. Well, I
Mm-hmm.
was afraid to look at it. And when I'm able to understand that this becomes an asset versus something I want to run away from, I'm able to step powerfully into the outside world where other people immediately sense that vibe. They
Mm-hmm.
connect with that vibration that I'm emitting, let's just say, and they're able to step into their own authentic self. Now, why that's important? Because this then speaks beyond just what we are hearing and seeing with our eyes, which can sometimes be super misleading in any endeavor of our lives. In the classroom, for example, there was this sense where even administrators would come and say, "Hey, man, I just need a break. I don't need to talk about anything at all. But I know when I need this type of thing, I'm going to come here. I don't know why. I don't understand it, but I'm coming to your room.
And yo, George, the workplace can be rough, right? If you don't have that, then your life, if you are in a toxic environment, and every workplace I've ever heard of at one point or another has toxicity in it, then you truly are, to use mythical terms, walking into an isolated underworld. So I can hear that. We all need that place, that friend who we can trust to share things with. You said a few things in this that I want to explore more deeply. Let's start with the word vessel. You described yourself as a vessel. By the way, I view myself purely as a vessel. But sometimes I think, until I had this conversation with you, that I'm the only person in the world that sees myself that way. What is a vessel in the lingo that you're using? Why did you choose to use that word?
Selflessness. For me, it means that it's as if I'm able to channel or transmit a wider lens, a wider view of not just myself, but everything around me. So just imagine if there were 12 drones up above you, looking down constantly at you, allowing you to get a pulse of everything around you. And for me, this wasn't so easy to come to. There was a journey, there was a process, there was pain, there was abuse, there was all sorts of things that I had to endure to understand this and to evolve into this. But to answer your question, this is more the term vessel for me becomes a it's active. It's not linear. So what that says is it allows the myself or anyone near me to be themselves, at a more rapid pace than they would anywhere else. Let me put it that way. And that's sort of the experience that I have when I'm around other people. From someone who is homeless. So just yesterday, I was driving down Fordham Road in the Bronx real quick. I pull up to the light. The guy's doing his normal thing. I saw him ahead of time. The light turns red. He starts in the beginning. He walks to the back. I knew that I would be that first car when that light turned green and red again. Guess what? I was the first car when the light turned red. He looks at me, doesn't pull up his sign immediately as I saw him do prior.
Mm-hmm.
And I pull down the window and he takes a step towards me. He doesn't even say anything. Doesn't say the spiel or the pitch. I grab all the change I have on the side door and it's just there. And I hand it to him. And I say, "Can you hold up that sign?" And he's like, "Sure." Now keep in mind the light is going to turn green. There's a line of cars behind me. And he said, "This feels more like where I need to be than walking down the rest of this line to get more change." He shows me the sign, Scott. And it reads something to the effect of, "I need beer," or something like that to get that chuckle. And I said, "How about this? How about everything is a blessing when you don't have anything?" Try writing that down. And he said, "What? Say it again." And he writes it down. Everything is a blessing when you don't have anything. He said, "What's your name?" I said, "George." He goes, "Yeah, man." And then the light turns green. I take a picture of him because he's like, "Take a picture. I'm never going to forget you." And off I drive. So vessel means awareness. It means allowing. It means letting go of any stereotypes or stigmas I typically would have had maybe, let's say, 30 years ago in this, closing my window, moving away, or driving off. And it means that, Scott.
Vessel is, in light of everything that you've just said, and going back to Hermes, a very interesting allegory in a number of different ways that everything that you just described points to. Think about it. You described vessel. The word that really lurched out to me was selflessness. What is the role of a messenger and a herald? It is principally selfless. The message isn't what the herald or the messenger wants it to be. It's whatever the bigger picture requires. It demands making sure that there is, of course, clarity with communication, but it also demands that the ego be set aside and that a safe space for the response to the message be created. And so to me, this concept of a vessel really does tie back into the idea that you just mentioned of safety with regards to the space that we hold as leaders. But then that relates to, I'm sure you're going to be able to explain it better than I can, this whole concept that you've raised also in your earlier portion of the discussion around the shadow. We have not yet on this podcast discussed shadow work or what shadows are. They are deeply and intimately tied into myth. And mark my word, audience members, the concept of shadow will be returning as you continue to watch. But since this language is completely new to many people who might be watching, George, explain to us what a shadow is exactly.
A shadow is with us at all times. It is us to some varying degree. The shadow is the darker side of our personalities, of our behaviors, decisions we've made, whether by uh, consequences or circumstances outside of our control. They were could have been based on ignorance. They could have been based on something motivating as well. And it is there. The important thing about it is that the awareness of it. So some travelers, some people that can go, we're all travelers, Scott.
Mm-hmm.
So as we're traveling through whatever universe and whatever world we're in our now moment, there is this opportunity to be more aware of the shadow or completely ignore it. But something deep within us tells us it's there. We know it's there. Is it something that speaks to you? Is it something that presents a feeling when you enter a certain place? Is it something that pushes you or gently nudges you into behaviors that are not serving you constantly? And you're like, damn, I've done that before. Why do I keep doing that? So it could be something really small, but then it could be your shadow could be something that really hampers the greatness within you, the life that you know you want to live. So whether you choose to look at it or not, whether you choose to acknowledge it or not, makes the difference between someone who lives an authentic life. Doesn't mean good, doesn't mean right, just means your authentic, your authentic self, Scott. So,
What does that mean then to someone who is watching this from a leadership perspective? How does that impact us, not just as living the life that we want to live, but as the leaders that we want to be?
it means that if we have a shadow, each of the people that we influence have one too. And if you're stepping into a leadership position, which typically doesn't happen, you don't typically volunteer or step into it. You are called to it, I believe, whether it is in a professional workspace, volunteer workspace, you're called to lead because of this balance, this ability to understand that you have that. And when you do that and you decide to accept a leadership role, whether it has a label or not, then this means you're able to move in spaces with non-judgmental language, non-judgmental approaches. It means that the heart of you, your ability to encourage the heart of others, is at a higher level when you accept this, when you're more familiar with this. Does that resonate?
It does. I'm going to personalize this a little bit, though. Part of why I was so excited about having you on this show, being totally transparent for those who watch, is that you have a leadership position as of the date of this recording with a major international nonprofit. And I have been involved with that same nonprofit for many years. And I will never forget the first time I met you in person leading a major event for this major nonprofit. Major. I think I'm overusing that word a little bit, but it is accurate. Nonetheless, I was utterly inspired. I was blown away by the authenticity and the genuineness of what you brought into the room, as well as the way you were really able to bring out the best people, the resources that you had for that event. It was very close to the end of the pandemic, one of the first major events for that organization where people were truly beginning to feel comfortable coming out and socializing and traveling to places again. You brought such positivity. There was no fear in the room. There was no anxiety. And it really was electrifying. And then as a participant in this organization, seeing you and engaging with you since then, what I have seen is someone who creates, as you described, a vibration, an energy field. I know that sounds woo-woo, but that's really the only way to describe it around you that is... to say it's a breath of fresh air is a little bit of an understatement. The only way I can describe it is that it electrifies those who choose to engage with that energy field. And it's very difficult not to, because that energy field brings so much positivity and is so compelling. And so the reason why I say that is when you're talking about understanding and acknowledging your shadow and then working with it to live and be your authentic self, which is what Hermes, the messenger, has to be able to do. I think about my own avatar, Helios, god of the sun, who was the guardian of oaths because lies can't live under the sunlight. He represented truth. And perhaps maybe that's why I, who is so driven by myself as a vessel for truth, feels attracted to the one who manages shadow, creates the safe space so that the truth that others bring into the room can come out. Talk to me about the consequences of a leader not living their truth.
The consequences are twofold. The first thing that comes to mind is there is a disconnect between, it's not just a shadow, because if you don't acknowledge or even want to look at the shadow side of yourself or know that it exists within others, then there might be things decision making wise that you're not going to be as accurate with. So that's number one. So productivity, goal setting, meeting those marks. So when you're talking about those types of things. Now, if you're talking about the softer side of life and characteristics and dealing with influence and things that are not tangible with the eyes, understand that everything has a spectrum. So as much as we have this shadow, we have a light within us. So if you were to say, hey, George, what else is there? I would say that there's a light within you, Scott. And there's a light within everyone in that room that you just spoke about. So why does messenger, vessel, shadow, light, those four things, they all work together? Because I see the light within you. So, back to your question, if the leader is in a position and they're not acknowledging or not wanting to understand or look at the shadow, then that means they can't even play with the light either. They can't really see the light in someone to the degree that they could pair them properly with a particular task. So for let's go even further. Let's say I have a team and I am looking across humans, people, employees, and I am trying to be effective in my role as a leader. I want to pair the niche skill of the individual with the particular strategy within the strategy to accomplish the goal, so we're all on the same boat. We're all rowing together, Scott. Here we
Yeah.
are, right? If you lack the ability to see the light and see the shadow, you're never going to be able to connect with someone authentically. They're never going to let you in. They're just not.
Mhm.
You're always going to, there's just going to be a bunch of people walking around pretending. And where does that get you?
It reminds me of a Toastmasters club that I was part of. For those who are not familiar with Toastmasters, it is the largest, greatest public speaking organization on the planet. And I have been a member of a number of different chapters over the years. At one meeting, a woman came up and gave her speech, which is one of the things that you do in a Toastmasters meeting. You prepare a speech and then you give it to those that are in the audience, and then someone else in the audience is designated your evaluator, and then they stand up and give a constructive feedback speech of your speech. And I had seen this woman speak a number of times, and I felt drawn to providing her with feedback because I felt the evaluations she had received that I had seen were not being honest with her. They were not being truthful. Why? Because she had one mode and one mode only. It was positive, it was cheery, it was joyful. And after a while, my feedback to her was, listen, bad things have happened in your life too. You've got to be, no disrespect to her, but she had to be in her mid 40s at least. She could not have been on this earth that long and not have had anything trouble her whatsoever. If she did, she didn't need to be speaking because she didn't have a message to share to anyone. But it's impossible that would have happened. And so one of the things I said is that I'm sensing when I'm watching you that you're afraid to talk about fear. You're afraid to talk about pain. You're afraid to be angry. And the audience needs that. We can't just have chipper, chipper, chipper. I say that because, again, going to the subject of shadow and knowing it and understanding it and being authentic, one thing that I also see has infected a lot of corporate environments is almost a demand by management that the staff be what I call, and others call as well, not just me, toxically positive. And that is as much of a disconnect from reality and truth as anything. And the world is facing real problems. Everyone's standing around talking like we're just, like the corporations that we work for, our bosses, our leadership generally is nothing more than just something to do pom-pom routines over. It's to me a little bit ridiculous.
I agree. It makes a lot of sense, Scott, and I've been in those environments. The By choice or by default or by your environment, we've all suffered. We're all suffering beings. I don't care where you've come from. I don't care what kind of history or upbringing you have. There has been a moment of suffering or moments or decades. It depends on your story. And why I say that is because when you have this mime sort of mentality and you're out there mimicking each other with this positive sort of vibe, there lies this music beneath the words. And when you're a vessel and you're tapped in and you're tuned in and it's finely tuned, which that's my work, that's not your work to do. I have to tune myself up because I'm not this perfect vessel. I
Mhm.
will wake up in my own, BS and things that I'm recalling and things that are at the forefront that shouldn't be, and that's the hard stuff. That's the hard work. That's the real work. So with that said, when you're able to understand that and work through that and build a routine for yourself as someone who can look at that shadow, understand that there's light, of course. But if you stay on one side and you don't acknowledge the other, or you're just acknowledging the light,
Mhm.
this quote unquote light, the positive stuff, it's a house of cards, Scott. It's going to come
Mm.
down one way or the other.
And I really do feel that is a risk that a lot of leaders inadvertently fall into, particularly those that are new or insecure. I once had a boss who told the chief financial person for the organization that they ran, chief financial person, if you disagree with my proposals, the chief financial person raised the fact that there was no money in the budget for what this person wanted to do. Right? The boss said, if you speak to me about that sort of thing anymore, you can consider yourself the lawn and me a lawnmower. That's to me encouraging toxic positivity. That person, that chief financial person, could have yesed her right off a cliff. And is that really worth it from a leadership perspective? I don't think so.
Nope. Nope. The ability to see this in real time and not it so it can't just be an idea, right? You can't just want something and it be this idea that lives in here. I think another connection to Hermes is my ability to not just create the safe space, but then when I am engaged to action, or if the person is needing some sort of a next step, that's where the magic happens, Scott. That's when it gets really lit in the room. That's when it gets really exciting, when I have encountered that segment, that next step. Because one of the gifts that I bring to the world is, how do I get them to the next step?
Mm.
Because it's not just the awareness of it. It's not so you got a few steps. You got to be aware of it. So if you don't, that checkpoint is done. You're out. But let's say you are aware and you're willing to try. Then what? Then enters George once again, because again, through my own pain, through my own life's journey of stories. Listen, I went to a Catholic school, Scott, and I was at the top of my game from
Mm.
first grade to eighth grade, 99, whatever, right? What did that do? It gave me privileges. It gave me privileges to be outside the classroom in the Catholic elementary school. Altar boy, this, that. What did that lead to? A connection to God, maybe, but yes, it led to other things that we know have been made public with the scandals of the Catholic Church. So I'm just
Mm.
disclosing that was my one of the many things that was really, really impactful for me, that was devastating to me as a child, and it allowed me to understand where the environment, where you're trying to be great, you're trying to move in a situation, in a place, and do well and be at the top and be the leader of your class, and there you go, you're met with this darkness that you can't even understand. Now I bring that up only to say that it is through experiences in that darkness where you become aware of what this means, how others carry their own shadow, and how in that darkness you gotta find some kind of light.
Yeah.
Now I'm talking about this so cleanly and simply today, but that was not the case even 15 years ago, even 20
Mhm.
years ago, Scott. It was something that I
Mhm.
couldn't even understand, or even as a full grown adult get into. So why did I bring this up? Why did I take us in this direction, Scott? Because there is a depth to every single human that you encounter. And if it's all surface and it's all smiles and giggles and it's all BS, there's only so far you could go. There's only so far you could go, Scott. So
Sometimes I think about, for instance, global political leadership. We'll leave aside corporate and business leadership for a little while because that may be more difficult for people to wrap their minds around right away, although we're going to get back to that. Let's talk about global leadership. The idea that you as a leader have to appear strong, that you have been unconquerable, that you're always right, that you have no loss in your past, that you've always been a winner, or have this unblemished history of success, brings us down. I think listening to you, because then that leader not being able to connect to or relate publicly to the darkness that they may have faced, not be able to share that, not able to address it, doesn't put the society in its best position to be able to address itself. And then, in my opinion at least, the dysfunction of the leader becomes the dysfunction of the society. Look at the United States. We have division. We have infrastructure problems. We have social unrest. We have all sorts of turmoil and entitlement and people willing to take all sorts of extreme actions that are anti nationhood in their impact and in their long-term flow into the public discourse. Yet, if we're not able to honestly talk about, with empathy, with realness, the pain, then how are we ever going to get better? And if we insist that our leaders run from pain, never have weaknesses, never have vulnerabilities, then again, the avatars that represent us are reflections both to and back as to who and what we are. We're going to be caught until we utterly collapse. I can't help but think about those who perpetuated these behaviors, who were not forced to face their own shadow, or the institution of the church, in this case, not being able to fully address the shadow within it that tolerated that happening. And look at what is happening with the church in the Western world. It's shrinking dramatically. People are leaving in droves in Ireland, of all places. If someone is afraid of facing that shadow, if they're like, I can't deal with these things in a work environment or as a leader, bringing this back to the corporate or the more general leadership sphere, how do you encourage them to do that, George? How do you do that? Because it's my belief that most leaders, we're going to get to this in a minute, who feel that call also want to be drawn into the expression of their fullest light. What do you tell them?
I tell them, get help. And getting help, doesn't mean call a hotline. It doesn't mean psychotherapy in some cases. In some cases it does. It doesn't mean speak to someone who has victimized you. It starts with the courage to stand in the gap. You got to start understanding that it's going to take some kind of courage to stand in the gap. So it's the movement. So you got 2 points, you got a bridge. You're on one side of it or you're on the other. It doesn't matter the topic. We could talk about the politics, the church, right? And then you got the bridge. What is going to bridge us together? So it's not even what or who, it's, do I have the courage to walk to the center and stand in the gap. Stand at the center of the. So it starts within you. It starts within the awareness of, is it a micro step that I have to take first because I can't handle sort of certain things? Is it a half a step? Is it a quarter step? I think the issue is when the individual thinks there's too big of a leap that they have to make,
Yeah.
they just stay in their shell and they'll just live this baby out till they flatline. That's it. I'm good. I'm going to stay still. I'm going to stay rowing the boat in my speed, in my way, because I don't really know what that next step is. I don't know if
Mhm.
it's micro. I don't know. It's too big of a jump. Is it a night out with the boys to kind of loosen up? Is it a seminar? Is it going back to school? Some of those things are too big of a jump because when something's too big of a jump, it knocks you down further
Mm.
than where you currently are. So then you're like, but I tried. I thought it was that. So if you were to ask me, getting help means, it could mean getting a life coach. It could mean seeking professional help. It could mean inching towards something you know within you you're wanting, but not taking too big of a leap because sometimes too big of a leap is just too much and it sets you back actually further than you thought it would.
You see that in corporate environments sometimes when people are over promoted. They are moved too fast because maybe they are the boss's son or because someone saw something in them, but they believed that that was a greater, gave them more great instant potential than they really were ready for. Or sometimes it could be the promoting advocate's ego. That person reminds me of me, therefore they can do pretty much what I can. And so we'll put them in that position. They get over promoted and then catastrophe happens because micro steps really, really are pivotal. You raise some things that point to a couple of other things that I want to say real quick. Then I want to move the discussion into an area that's been underneath what we've talked about before, but I feel has to be addressed. Number one, with regards to courage, anyone who might want additional thinking on how to become more courageous as a leader, I recommend take a moment and go to the episode that we taped with Martin Stark, who talks at length about an exact process for how you can become a courageous leader that goes into more depth than George has had the time to express here, although what George had to say really is at the base of it all. And I think that that's a pretty powerful statement. And then number two, I do want to also point out that the whole idea of getting help, sometimes high-powered professionals in certain cultures really recoil from. Yeah, I tell people the greatest hero of all, Hercules, and the myths when he was performing his 12 labors, when some of them were a bit overwhelming, even he got his homeboy, Iolaus, to help him. He was not afraid to ask for help. Even the greatest heroes, Jason and the Argonauts, Perseus, again, Hercules, asked the gods and gods for help. If the greatest heroes in all history can ask for help, yo, you can too. Yeah, it's like get real. George, you've talked about the concept of a call. I felt a call to become what I am in an ongoing process of becoming right now. What is a call? How do you know if it's true?
Yeah. The call comes in many ways. It's a really good question, Scott. It got me, I'm excited now. Well, I've been excited, but this puts me into another like realm of excitement with respect to this topic of the calling because it's things that you don't really see.
Mm.
And that's what makes this special. It makes it a little bit different. It's the unconscious work that I think as humans we have to do. It's a nudge, it's a gentle whisper. It is something that can be that at first, but then it becomes, for lack of a better term in this moment, as my mind is thinking of images, it could become the Great Wall of China of a blockade in your life,
Mm.
where you're like, shoot, something was nudging me. It was like a fly that distracted me, and I was just like, this fly. But even that fly was a moment of contemplation for you to think about, hey, maybe you need to slow down. Maybe you needed to not do this right now. Then the Great Wall of China comes if you don't pay close attention.
Mm,
Because when you don't pay close attention, then life becomes almost unmanageable, where you're like,
mm.
see, now I got to look back and connect these dots and go, wow, shoulda did this, I shoulda did that. And then what do you do with all those shouldas? You got a bag of shouldas, Scott. A bag of bricks, a bag of
Mhm.
shouldas, and you're like, sheesh. But you know what? There's nothing to be too upset about with that bag of shouldas, because when you're called, nothing's gonna stop you as long as you keep paying attention. If you keep paying attention, nothing's going to stop you. If you refuse to look at the shadow, if you're not so good at it, if you're not looking at the light, if you don't know what your next steps are, if you don't really want to get help, something will evolve, whether it is in your health, whether it is in something's going to speak to you that says, yo, go. I'm calling you.
Amazingly, even if you think you're paying attention to the call, sometimes there may be things that you ignore that you only realize when they happen, are pointing to areas of self development. An example I've given a number of places is the illness that I had in 2023. I, for those who haven't heard the story before, I was going along with life, feeling like I was fulfilling my call, moving my business forward, excited about it, doing all the things that any good entrepreneur does that they're supposed to do in order to grow and develop and have that impact, until one day in the middle of June, I woke up feeling like an icicle was stabbing the base of my neck uncontrollably. And within 10 days, I'd lost 20 pounds, was unable to walk, and on the verge of death. And, you know, I share the story wherever I go and repeat it as often as I can because I feel it needs to be heard. Before the morning I woke up unable to walk, I slept like 20 hours. I'd stopped eating, I'd stopped drinking, I was sleeping all the time. And I had this horrible dream in which I was walking through mansions. The mansions had floor to ceiling bookcases. They were full of baseball cards. And as I pulled out each baseball card, the baseball cards were all identical. They said in big bold letters, "Your number's up." And then above those words was my headshot. And the hospital doctors later told me that if I hadn't been in such physical good shape, I would have died. And even when I was in the hospital, I remember imagining the obituary that was being written for me. My number was up. The universe, that illness, were pointing me to things that I wasn't doing, shadows of my own that I wasn't addressing. And exactly as you said, because I'd refused to address them for so long, the universe brought a cataclysmic event into my life. But these horrors, if we manage them, can be blessings. George, what about people who say, I don't have any calling, or I'm too old, my time's past?
Scott, first and foremost, I am so glad you're here. Let me tell you,
We're both glad each other's
let me
here.
keep it real with you. And you're probably not even going to understand what I'm about to say or believe it. Let's just say that, believe it. You're going to understand it, but you're not going to believe it. This is the very first podcast that I am doing. So I am answering your last question with that statement.
Mm-hmm.
Never in my life, I always thought something had to be perfect. I have to wait. I have to be famous to do a podcast. I have to do this. I had all these beliefs. Maybe later when I get this next degree, maybe when this happens and this speech gets done and this TEDx talk is finished. So to all those that think that it's too late or they're too old, I think you set an intention think that really is the first step. It's really setting an intention. And setting the intention is a thought you keep thinking, just to make it real practical for whoever's watching. It is a thought that you keep thinking. So in this case, it's time. It's time for George to be on a podcast. So this is my inner working.
Mm.
What happens? You show up and you're like, George, I want to do a podcast. And it's not that easy. It didn't happen the next day.
Mm-hmm.
But this was it. This was the line of thinking, and thoughts become things.
Yeah.
They can become shadowy things, or they could be things that serve us. So no matter what your age is, no matter what the situation is, and thank goodness you're here. Thank all the gods that you're here, Scott, because when I heard that, and I recall those moments where you were just not doing well, you weren't in your best days, and I was really getting worried. Yet there's something about you that continues to project to, not just to me, not just to the world, but you project it within yourself. I could see it. I could see the light in you. It just says, not yet. There's more to do. I'm not done here. I can't wait for more. So set the intention. Thoughts become things. Your inner critic is your biggest challenge. It will always be.
Talk to us a bit about what being an educator has taught you about leadership in other environments. Because, again, talk about people whose lives may have had lights that are temporarily extinguished, or who are facing real challenges, and who can be difficult to manage. You've dealt with them, who are coming from entire family situations full of shadow. You've seen it.
Hold the light. It's taught me to hold the light. So it's not about, so I know that there's a shadow there. I know there's darkness. It's within everyone, whether they see it, want to see it or not, it's there. So my learning as an educator has been hold the light. So in a classroom, holding the light is saying to someone who's never gotten 100 in math, hey, today's day one. You started with 100. You never got 100. Today you got 100 just for showing up. You got 179 more days to keep the 100. I'm here to hold the light with you. I'm here to take this walk with you. So that's what education has taught me. It's taught me how to hold the light for the individual. Like, how would I have known that he's never got 100? Because I took the time to understand that this was this person's pain point. So education, being an educator, has taught me this is not about the 100. This is about the individual connecting with me first and having the courage to stand in their gap, to stand there first. Don't do anything yet. Let's just stand there. Let's tiptoe there. Let's put a little, but let's eventually get the courage to get there and set that intention. And when there's that momentum, it's also taught me that it really does tell me that anything is possible, Scott. It really does teach me that.
Thinking about everything that you've shared in this unbelievably rich and, in a beautiful way, emotional conversation,
Mm-hmm.
I can't help but imagine that one thing that will really stick with me is this idea of not being afraid of the shadow and beginning to practice courage by stepping into that concept of the gap between where you are now and what's fully possible for you. And imagining it that way gives me that visual in the mind that perhaps will help others, and it certainly will help me, be able to do that the next time I need to step into a gap.
Mm-hmm.
George, if there's something else you'd like to say or that you haven't had a chance to say so far, What might that be?
One more clue I'd like to leave you with is there's this thought that you want to get back to some place that was really good in your life because that's the reference point that you have. You're like, I want to go back to that
Mm.
when I, right? That, but that wasn't anything physical. It wasn't the money. It wasn't the vibe. It was the feeling. It was the vibe. It was how you felt during that reference point. So I leave you with, and I came away with the thought of this challenge of stepping up with your courage and standing in the gap by imagining, by being creative, by finding the feeling and putting it, holding it in front of you as you're looking to that best self, whatever that is, whatever that goal is. So take the feeling of that place you think you want to go back to, put it in front of you, and let that feeling be wrapped in everything you do. And as that feeling is wrapped in everything you do, hold that. Hold that first before you take action. Hold that feeling first before you take action, and then take action.
Hermes was the herald of the gods. And I hope that, like the notes that come out of a herald's trumpet, your words resonate with a lot of people for a long time. George, thank you for being on this show. Where can people find you?
People can find me in this information that you will be sharing on my LinkedIn page. And I am so happy to see your messages and communicate with you. Scott, this has been amazing.
Be sure to reach out to George. Like he just said, his LinkedIn profile will be in the caption below, and he is an incredibly open and, as you can tell, worthwhile person to connect with. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to share it with everyone that you know. And then make sure you come back again for more discussions that are rich, insightful, deep, and heartfelt about myths, life, and leadership. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and like this episode. Leave a comment below if you have anything on your mind. And if you have myths or mythical figures from ancient Greece that you'd like us to discuss, or ideas or questions that you would like to have us explore on this show, by all means, make sure you leave those in the comments too. We might find a way to bring George other guests or find new guests to talk about those issues too. Thank you all for being a part of the Myth Slayer Cafe. We've loved having coffee with you today.